Chronicon Mundi.
Dive deep into history.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today we are jumping into the year 1760. And if you've been following along, you know this is a time of just immense tension for the French forces in North America.
It really is. It's this moment of incredible effort and ultimately heartbreak. We're looking at the French counteroffensive to retake Quebec.
An effort led by the Chevalier de Lévis.
A truly extraordinary effort. But, and this is the key to the whole story, it was an effort that was strategically doomed before the first shot was even fired.
And that's exactly what this deep dive is all about, unraveling that strategic reality. We're going to dig into the preparations for Lévis's last-ditch attempt.
And the surprising victory he pulls off at the Battle of Saint-Foy.
Right. A huge tactical win. But
Right.
then we're going to put that entire campaign up against the bigger picture, the overwhelming strategic reality that had already sealed Canada's fate.
Which was a massive naval defeat in Europe the year before. It's the ultimate lesson in how global warfare works.
The fate of a continent wasn't decided in the forests of North America.
No. It was decided on the high seas by warships fighting in a storm off the coast of France. We're going to connect those dots for you and show exactly how sea power meant colonial power.
And after we establish that, we'll follow the final moves of the war in Canada.
Yeah, the final sort of desperate actions. We'll cover the defense of Fort Lévis, which is a fascinating story in itself.
And then the final, very controversial surrender of Montreal.
It's a story of incredible bravery, just smashing up against insurmountable logistics.
So let's start there. Let's go to that moment across the Atlantic that really decided everything for Quebec. We're starting in late 1759 with the battle that doomed Canada, Quiberon Bay.
Okay, so to really get this, you have to understand the stakes for France. By 1759, Britain had one simple, overriding military goal.
Complete dominance of the sea.
Total maritime dominance. Because if you're a French colony, whether you're New France in Canada or, a super valuable trading post in India, your survival depends entirely on a lifeline back to the home country.
For reinforcements, for supplies, for everything.
Everything. If the French Navy can't get out of port, the colonies just wither.
And the British had been trying to achieve this for years, right?
Yeah.
But not always successfully.
No, not at all. The sources say that before 1759, the British were engaged in this tedious, usually uneventful cruising off the French coast. They were trying to bottle up the ports.
A blockade.
Kind of.
Yeah.
But a true ironclad blockade wasn't really effective until 1759. That's the year the whole naval war just shifted completely.
So France realizes time is running out.
They know they need to do something big to break the British hold. The plan was, it was ambitious. Either they stage a full-scale invasion of Britain itself.
Which would force the Royal Navy to pull back and defend the home islands?
Exactly. Or, if that's not possible, they needed to punch a major reinforcement fleet through to save the colonies.
And this brings us to the French fleet gathering under Admiral Conflans. Where were they?
They were staging along the Brittany coast, with the main body of the fleet gathered near Quiberon Bay. This fleet was, and it's not an exaggeration to say this, France's last real hope of projecting power into the Atlantic.
Their last chance to save New France.
And India, for that matter. Their whole mission was to wait for an opening, any opening, get out of port, and try to catch the British off guard.
But the British have Admiral Edward Hawke waiting for them, one of the most aggressive naval commanders of the age.
And that leads us straight to November 20th, 1759. A massive confrontation. You've got Hawke with 23 ships of the line. These are the huge floating fortresses of the day.
And he's up against Conflans' fleet, which is comparable in size.
Right. So at dawn on the 20th, they spot each other, but the weather's just turning absolutely horrific. A new gale is blowing up from the northwest.
Okay, so conditions are deteriorating rapidly. Conflans, seeing the British in the storm, he makes what seems like a pretty sensible decision.
The only logical decision, really. He heads for shelter in Quiberon Bay. Now, the bay was known to be treacherous, but it offered protection from the open sea and from Hawke.
He was trying to use the terrain to his advantage.
Exactly. The shoals, the rocks. He thought he could force Hawke to break off the chase or risk wrecking his entire fleet.
But this is where Hawke becomes a legend. I mean, given the weather, the risks, Wasn't there a very real chance he could have just lost the whole battle to the storm? This seems like an unbelievably risky move.
It was an insane risk.
Yeah.
And that's precisely why it worked. Hawke knew the dangers. Quiberon Bay was notorious for its shifting shoals, its narrow entrance.
And he didn't have local pilots, did he?
No local pilots who knew the channels, especially not in a gale. But Hawke made a calculation. He knew that if he let Conflans get into that bay and escape, the French fleet would just live to fight another day. He couldn't allow that.
So it had to be now or never, a desperate all-or-nothing fight.
That's it. He famously signaled his captains to attack immediately. Forget the weather, forget the treacherous coastline. He's going to annihilate the French fleet while they are disorganized and running for cover.
And the results, they weren't just a defeat. You're talking about the complete destruction of France's Atlantic fleet.
An absolute unmitigated catastrophe for France. They lost 7 ships of the line in total. The human cost was just horrific.
How bad was it?
2 ships were sunk outright during the battle itself, the Thésée and the Superbe. Just on those 2 ships, you're looking at around 2,500 French sailors dead.
Wow.
On the Superbe alone, which capsized in the heavy seas, 12,240 men went down. Almost instantly. That's a demographic disaster for the French Navy.
And the weather claimed ships too, not just the British cannons.
Yes. The chaos was unbelievable. 2 more ships, the Juste and the Inflexible, were simply wrecked on the shoals as they tried to maneuver in the storm.
And what about the ships that did manage to get away?
Well, their fate was almost worse. They didn't really escape.
They weren't able to regroup and fight later.
No. They were forced to flee deep up the Vilaine River for shelter. And the victorious British fleet just parked itself at the mouth of Quiberon Bay. They sealed the rest of the French warships inside. They became essentially ships in a bottle.
So the French Atlantic fleet as a fighting force was just gone, neutralized.
For the rest of the war, it was completely gone.
Okay, so this is the crucial link. How does this victory in November 59, thousands of miles away, directly translate to the doom of the Quebec campaign 7 months later?
The connection is direct, and it is absolute. By destroying that fleet, Quiberon Bay cemented British control of the sea.
Which means 2 things.
2 critical things. First, the Royal Navy could now sail whatever men and supplies it wanted up the St. Lawrence River when the ice broke in the spring.
And second,
and this is the killer for Lévis, the supply fleet that he was desperately hoping for, the fleet that was supposed to help him retake Quebec. It could now never safely leave France, if it even existed.
Yeah, Lévis's entire 1760 counteroffensive was, from the very start, a strategic impossibility.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was a grand tactical gesture, but it had no strategic foundation at all. The war in Canada wasn't lost by the Army in 1760. It was lost by the Navy in 1759.
And this one battle had ripples across the entire globe.
It doomed the French in North America.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it sealed the fate of General Lally and the French trading posts in India. The whole French colonial empire was being strangled because it couldn't be resupplied.
That is a stark backdrop, and we have to keep it in mind as we shift our focus now back across the Atlantic to that desperate spring of 1760, to the desperate gamble, the Quebec counteroffensive and Sainte-Foy.
And you have to remember, Lévis is operating in a total information vacuum. He has no idea about the final crushing result of Quiberon Bay. He has to go forward on hope.
He had to commit everything New France had left.
Everything.
So after a brutal winter, and with New France already stretched thin for years, how does he even manage to pull an army together?
It was an incredible act of mobilization. I mean, he scrapes together an army of over 7,000 men.
That's a significant force.
It is. He does it by taking his 8 regular French battalions and filling out their ranks with Canadian militiamen. Then he adds 2 battalions of the Troupes de la Marine, more militia from Montreal, and his Indian allies.
You mentioned the Troupes de la Marine. For anyone unfamiliar, who were they exactly? They weren't sailors, were they?
No. Despite the name, they were colonial infantry. They were recruited specifically for service in the colonies, separate from the main French army. These are the guys garrisoning all the frontier forts, Niagara, Detroit.
So they were hardened to North American warfare.
Absolutely. They were the backbone of the defense of New France, right alongside the Canadian militia.
So 7,000 men is a lot, but desperation usually shows up in the equipment, doesn't it?
That's where you see the real problem. He had the men, but he didn't have the hardware. He had what the sources call a tiny train of artillery.
Which consisted of what?
Just 12 miserable old cannon. They were light, they were worn out, and they were completely useless for trying to break through the walls of a fortress like Quebec.
So he can't possibly plan for a long siege.
No, he's staking everything on a quick, decisive battle outside the walls. His entire plan depends on winning fast, and then
the French fleet showing up to save the day.
the Ghost Fleet from France. The one we know is never coming.
So April 1760, he makes his move.
Yes, they set out from Montreal. The troops are packed into barges and bateaux, and they're escorted by the last two frigates Canada has, the Atalante and Pomone. They sail downriver, land at Pointe-aux-Trembles, and then march the rest of the way.
And by the end of April, they're right outside Quebec.
Yep. April 27th, his advance guard reaches the village of Ste. Foy, less than 6 miles from the city walls.
Which brings us to the British commander, Brigadier General James Murray. He's got about 3,000 troops, and they're dug in on a strong position.
A very strong position. They're entrenched on high ground right across the road. And this is where the human element just completely takes over. Murray was known to be a bit hot-headed.
Confident after surviving the winter.
Maybe overconfident. If he had just stayed put, waited behind his defenses, Levis and his 12-old cannon would have been smashed to pieces trying to attack him.
But he doesn't wait. He marches out to meet them, even though he's outnumbered more than 2-1. What was he thinking? Was it arrogance?
It seems to have been a mix of things. Impatience, a bit of arrogance, and just a massive misjudgment of the situation. He saw the French scrambling to form their battle lines, and he thought he could pull off another quick victory, just like Wolfe did on the Plains of Abraham.
He underestimated Levis.
He completely underestimated Levis's professionalism, and he definitely underestimated the fighting skill of the Canadians in the woods.
So the morning of April 28th, the Battle of Sillery Woods, as it's also known, begins.
And Murray orders his entire force, over 3,000 men, and critically, his 22 field guns to advance. He gives up his defensive high ground.
A decision that backfires almost immediately.
Instantly. The terrain just turns on him. It's spring, so everything is melting snow and thick mud.
And his artillery gets stuck?
Immediately. The infantry moves forward, but those 22 cannons get bogged down in the slush and the mud. They just can't keep up. So Murray's infantry is advancing without its crucial artillery support.
And then his left flank pushes forward into the Sillery Woods.
Straight into a trap. The Canadian militiamen were hidden in those woods. They were masters of that kind of irregular forest fighting.
Not the linear battles the British were used to.
Not at all. The second the British entered the woods, it just became a brutal, close-quarters fight. The sources call the result murderous.
But Levis rallies his troops and counterattacks.
Yes, the French line holds, and then they push back. The final blow comes from a bayonet charge on the French right flank. That shatters the British line, and Murray's army is forced into a hurried, completely disorganized retreat back toward the city.
And in their retreat, they leave behind the one thing that Levis needed more than anything else.
Every single one of them. They abandon all 22 of their field guns, stuck in the mud. The French had just captured a ready-made siege train.
The battle only lasted 2 hours, but the cost was brutal. Even higher than the Plains of Abraham, right?
The ferocity is shocking. The British lost 259 killed and 839 wounded. That's over 1,000 casualties out of a force of less than 4,000.
And the French?
Their losses were heavy too, but lower. 193 killed and 640 wounded. It was a bloody, desperate victory for Levis.
So now he has the guns, and he starts the siege of Quebec. But he has to know he's on the clock.
He's living on borrowed time. He knows this victory just buys him a window. His men are exhausted, supplies are low, and he absolutely needs that fleet to arrive from France to sustain the siege.
And that hope is about to be completely and totally destroyed.
The waiting must have been agonizing. Then, on May 9th, a ship is spotted coming up the St. Lawrence.
A friendship.
No, it's the British frigate Lowestoft, and is quickly followed by a bigger warship, the Vanguard. They're carrying fresh supplies and reinforcements for Murray's garrison.
That sight must have just ended it all for Levis. The defeat at Quiberon Bay was now literally sailing up the river right in front of him.
The realization must have been crushing. With a Royal Navy in the river, the British garrison was safe. It could be resupplied forever. Levis's campaign was over.
He had no choice but to withdraw.
None. He immediately abandoned his trenches, pulled his men back across the Cap Rouge River, and began the long, demoralizing march back to Montreal, the last French stronghold.
So with that failure, we move into the final act of the war, the summer of 1760. The British are now preparing to finish it.
And this final phase is directed by General Geoffrey Amherst. He was a very methodical, very thorough commander. His plan was simple but overwhelming.
He was going to converge on Montreal from 3 directions at once.
Exactly. 3 massive British armies moving simultaneously to make any kind of resistance totally impossible.
Let's focus on Amherst's main force, which was the largest. He's coming from the west, north from Oswego, through the Thousand Islands.
It was a huge logistical operation. He had 5,500 regulars and 4,500 provincials, 10,000 men in total. And he had to move them and all his heavy siege guns through this maze of islands.
How did they manage that without disaster? The water can be treacherous there.
Meticulous planning. They used hundreds of flat-bottom boats called bateaux, and the key was the bateaux carrying the heavy artillery were always kept close to the shore, guarded by his Indian allies in canoes.
So if a storm blew up, they could get the guns to safety quickly.
Right. They weren't going to make the same mistake Murray did and lose their artillery.
And along the way, they run into one of the last vestiges of French naval power on the river.
They do. On August 17th, they come across the French ship Autoise, and it's just the worst possible spot. It's becalmed, so it can't maneuver.
A sitting duck.
Pretty much. The British send in 5 of their galleys, each with a 12-pounder cannon, and the Autoise is forced to surrender.
A small victory, but symbolic.
Hugely symbolic. They immediately refit the captured ship, put it under British command, and use it to control the rest of the river up to Montreal. The French maritime presence in Canada was now completely gone.
The next stop is the siege of Fort Lévis, also known as the Battle of the Thousand Islands. What can you tell us about this fort?
It was a small fort on an island in the middle of the river, perfectly placed to command the channel. And its commander was a familiar name, Captain Pouchot.
The same Pouchot from Fort Niagara.
The very same. He'd been returned in a prisoner exchange. Now he's holding this last little outpost with about 400 men.
With an army of 10,000, couldn't Amherst have just gone around it?
He could have, but that wasn't Amherst's style. He was methodical. He wanted to eliminate every single point of French resistance. So he sets up his batteries on the nearby islands and begins a massive bombardment on August 23rd.
And this is where Pouchot pulls off a really ingenious piece of defensive fighting. There's a great anecdote here.
It's a fantastic moment of battlefield improvisation. Amherst sends his warships to bombard the fort up close, but to hold their position in the strong current, they have to drop anchors from their sterns.
And Pouchot spots this.
He spots this vulnerability. He tells his gunners to stop using regular cannonballs. Instead, they load the cannons with scrap iron, bits of chain, anything they can find. Improvised shrapnel.
And they aim for the anchor cables?
They aim for the cables.
Yeah.
And it works.
No way.
They actually sever 2 of the anchor cables. The ships start drifting helplessly downriver. And even better, one of the main British ships, the Onondaga, runs aground right in front of the fort.
That's a serious problem for the British.
A very serious mishap, as the sources call it. Not only do they lose a warship, but the Onondaga was carrying a lot of the Army's reserve food and ammunition. Pouchot made them pay for it.
But even with that brilliant move, the outcome was never really in doubt, was it?
Sadly, no. He delayed them, he bloodied their nose, but he couldn't stop them. The sheer weight of cannon fire from Amherst's batteries eventually just silenced all the fort's guns. Pouchot capitulated on August 25th.
The last obstacle is gone. The 3 British armies converge on Montreal, and the end of New France is here.
It was over. You have Lévis, Governor-General Vaudreuil, and the intendant Bigot, all trapped in the city. Their army is down to maybe 3,000 men. Most of the militia and the Indian allies have just melted away, gone home. They knew it was lost.
Vaudreuil tried to buy some time, didn't he?
He did. He sent Louis-Antoine de Bougainville, who would later become a famous explorer, to ask for a 1-month ceasefire, hoping for a miracle.
And Amherst said no.
An immediate no. He gave them until noon to surrender.
Which Vaudreuil agrees to. But then this huge controversy blows up over the honors of war.
Yes, and this is a really important point about military culture at the time. Lévis, as a professional soldier, expected to be granted the honors of war.
Which means what, exactly?
It's a sign of respect for a defeated but brave opponent. They would be allowed to march out of the city with their flags flying, drums beating, keeping their personal sidearms. It acknowledges that they fought honorably.
And Amherst refused to grant them this.
He refused, flat out. He demanded a simple, unconditional surrender. Lévis was so insulted that he supposedly ordered his men to burn their regimental colors rather than surrender them in dishonor.
What was Amherst's reason for this? It seems like a needlessly harsh move.
Amherst justified it by saying the French had encouraged their Indian allies to, in his words, perpetrate the most horrid and unheard-of barbarities during the war.
He's talking about things like the massacre at Fort William Henry.
Exactly. He was using the surrender terms to make a political statement, to punish the French leadership for their wartime conduct. It was a calculated humiliation.
So Levis, with no military options left, has to accept these harsh terms.
He had no choice. And with that, New France was gone.
And that really brings our deep dive on the year 1760 to a close. We've seen the desperate French counteroffensive, the naval battle that doomed it, and the final inevitable march to Montreal.
Yeah, to sum it up, 1760 is this story of incredible tactical success at Ste. Foy for Levis and his men, completely nullified by the strategic reality of British sea power. Once the Royal Navy owned the St. Lawrence, the fall of Canada was just a matter of time.
And that surrender in Montreal, that's pretty much the end of major military operations in North America for this war.
It is. The fighting is over. Now the conflict moves from the battlefield to the negotiating table in Europe.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the 1760 campaign. We really hope you'll tune in for our next and final deep dive in this series.
We'll be exploring the ultimate resolution of the conflict, the end of the French and Indian War, and the huge world-changing Treaty of Paris in 1763.
We'll see how all these military victories and defeats were translated into a completely redrawn map of the world.
We'll look at who won, who lost, and what it all meant for the future of the continent.
If you enjoyed this deep dive, please be sure to subscribe or give us a like. We'll see you next time.